Finally, we have to ask the question, how do we labor? And we do that through the practice of vocation. You see, our vocation is where we start to express everything that we've learned, how we've been formed, what we believe, understanding the context we live in. We start to use our gifts and our talents to contribute to not only the flourishing for our own lives, but for the world around us. And that takes us beyond the home. It takes us into industries. It takes us into institutions. It takes us into the public square, where we start to live out a vision of vocation that starts to fix things that are broken in our society, that offers an imagination to the world around us for their industries and how they contribute to the good and redemptive purposes instead of contributing or celebrating things that are corrupt or evil or divisive. And so it's with our vocations that we're all called to walk forward wherever God has placed us, wherever He's put us in this context, with a vision for hopefulness and to do it with joy in such a way that those around us ask bigger questions. So as you learn about this sixth and final practice, consider, what is it that God's saying to you? How does He want to use you and your gifts to be a part of His vision, to show up in the world, to be a presence in the world, to offer love to the world in a way maybe it's never encountered before?
And the last question is this: how should we labor? How should we labor? Now, this is a question about vocation, about what it means for human beings to labor faithfully in and for this world. And this too is a question that we have to answer both for ourselves and for our neighbors. For ourselves, because the purpose of faithful Christian presence is not simply to live with our neighbors, but to labor for them. The whole purpose of vocation is that we are to bring goodness out of this earth and bless them with it. To cultivate orchards and to create cities where our neighbors can flourish. But it isn't easy. And this is why we need to think about it for our neighbors, because even though we live in a culture that, because of its roots in both Christian and Enlightenment history, places a massive emphasis on work. A massive emphasis on work. We are deeply confused about both the nature and the goal of human work. There's deep confusion in our current moment. And so because of this, one of the most important tasks in the Christian church is to reimagine vocation, to give itself again to asking, how do we labor? And in order to do that, to continue to mature in our own accounts of vocation, we are going to have to think about two aspects of how we labor with renewed maturity. The first of those is what I'm going to call the domains of vocation. The domains of vocation. These are the areas that we work. Here's what I mean. Over the past several decades, a ton of work has been done in the Christian church about what you might call the individual domain of vocation. About helping Christians understand the way that their individual work in this world is a part of life with God. That's to say, the way God calls every human being to labor. Every man, woman, and child, He gives them gifts. And the call is to understand those individual gifts and then to exercise them in the world. And this renewed emphasis on the individual domain of the church has been an incredible benefit to so many of us in overcoming this deadening dualism between our life with God and our life in the world. And many of you have benefited from that. But we have to go further than this. Because in addition to the individual, we have to think about two other domains, and they are these. The first is what I'm going to call the institutional domain. The institutional domain. Most of us live and work in larger institutions. And I don't just mean larger companies. I mean as a part of a larger system of institutions, whether they're economic institutions or political institutions or educational or artistic, legal institutions. We work in the context of larger institutions. And whether these institutions are large or small, whether they're local or multinational, they have incredible impact, both for the good and for the harm of our neighbors. And because of this, Christians have to develop a mature and robust theory of institutions. We have to press beyond the merely individual domain and to give an account of the institutional domain, the horizon of our vocations, and the meaning of faithful work within institutions. And that leads to the second domain, and it is the civic domain. This is because institutions, they don't work in a vacuum. They actually work in dense overlapping networks with one another. And these dense overlapping networks of institutions create the foundation of our cities, of our communities. They create civic ecologies in which we and our neighbors live and move. And while one of the great developments in the Christian church in the past 20 years has been a broad cultivation for the love of cities, and many of you have benefited from that, it's not clear to me that we've yet cultivated an understanding of cities, how they work, that we understand how cities actually work, and therefore how we can work most effectively within them. And so because of this, we must renew our attention to all three of those domains, not just the individual, but also the institutional, beyond the institutional, to the civic, and to the civic ecology which these institutions create. So those are the domains of vocation. And secondly, we're going to have to give renewed attention to what I want to call the direction of vocation. The direction of vocation. And what is the goal of Christian vocation? It is, of course, love. And for many, many years, people in the Christian church have understood that our work is devoted toward the love of God, that work is in fact an act of Christian devotion, and that everything that we do is an expression of our love for God. This is the direction of a vocation that's oriented towards God. But Christians also understand, have long understood, that there's another direction to our vocation, and it is not just God, it is also to the neighbor, that we are supposed to work for them, for our brothers and our sisters, and our neighbors and our enemies, that our vocations are to be directed and loved towards all people. And this means that the direction of vocation is not just Christian devotion, it's also the common good. That when we work, we are laboring for the common good. And in this age, which is a pluralist age, in which we and our neighbors live together, we have to continually explore what it means for Christians to work for the common good, because we have not conceived of this maturely enough, about what it means for Christian men and women and children to get up every day of their lives and go out and to do their work for the sake of their neighbors and their cities. And so in the midst of a culture with deep struggles over the meaning of vocation, the church has to recover a strong vision of vocation in which we labor in our individual and institutional and civic lives, both for the love of God and for the love of neighbor and of enemy. Now, I said at the beginning that we have this responsibility of our time together and our time in the world for the church to reassess and to reimagine the faithfulness of its own presence in the world. And I said that we're being asked to do so in an age in which our neighbors wander, in which they're no longer looking for us, in which we're no longer looking for them. And this responsibility to reimagine Christian faithfulness is therefore deeply burdensome, but it's also beautiful and it's ours. And how are we to do this? There are lots of ways, but it's by answering these 6 questions. The question of context, where are we? We live in an age of inescapable contradiction. Secondly, the question of confession. What do we believe? We believe in the divine love manifested in Jesus Christ and expressed by the power of the Spirit through the church to the whole world. Thirdly, the question of identity. Who are we? We are creatures of glory, of shame, and of hope. We have to embrace this identity, both for ourselves and our neighbors. Fourth, the question of formation. How do we grow? We grow toward the purposes of love, and we do so through the practices of love lived out daily together. Fifth, how do we love? How do we love? We love by reestablishing households as schools of love and reprioritizing hospitality as the extension of love. And sixth, the question of vocation. How should we labor? We should carry out our vocations in our individual lives, in our institutional settings, and our civic spaces, both for the love of God and for the love of our neighbors. And what do you think will happen if we do this? What will happen if we do this? I don't exactly know. Because the whole point of this is that we are in a work of reimagining. These are the improvisations of love. And we will only know as we live them out together. But here's what I do know. You remember that woman? Wrapped in cloth and stepping out into the wind. And you remember the hundreds of thousands of people who were like her, the men and women and children, wandering in this world in search of their own lives. Do you remember them? I know that they live in your city. I know that they all live in your city, and every day they wrap themselves in whatever they have, and they make their way through the pain of the manifold absences of this world. I know that. And I know that God loves them. I know that God loves all of them. He delights in their dignity. He weeps in their pain, and he longs for their shelter. I know that. And I know that because God loves them, he has put you there. He's put you there in that city, and not just you, but many others like you in the Christian church, to be the faithful presence of love in the absences of this world. And because of this, I know that the work before us, this work of reimagining Christian faithfulness in our time, it's not in vain. It's not in vain. And as we do these things, as we give ourselves to asking these questions and to answering them together, I know that our neighbors will begin to look for us. And I know that they will find us because we will be looking for them. And in finding us, what will they find? Not darkness, but light. Not restlessness, but rest. Not estrangement, but embrace. And no longer absence, but at last the very presence of love.